Hi, I'm Danielle Dedrick with CSpire Business. At CSpire, we provide businesses of all sizes with what they need to win: real insight, a wealth of experience, and an IT partner whose head is always in the game. Our specialized IT experts work with your team to deliver the right solutions for your unique challenges. One size fits all doesn't cut it, and as your needs change, we help your solutions change with them, keeping you prepared for tomorrow's challenges too. We are honored to be a part of the 2020 Tennessee HIMSS Summit, an organization that impacts lives of millions of patients across the globe. I have the pleasure of introducing Mr. Paul Keckley. Paul will be speaking to us today on the future of U.S. healthcare, a macroeconomic analysis. Paul is the managing editor of the Keckley Report, a healthcare policy analyst, and a widely known industry expert. He is a frequent speaker and advisor to healthcare organizations focused on long-term growth, sustainability, and advocacy strategies. Paul, we're so glad to have you today. Take it away.
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Keckley. I'm honored to be part of this meeting, and I'm also a bit intimidated knowing that Todd Featherling and Eric Threlkeld and other folks that I've known through my career are a part of this audience in this group. This topic, the future of U.S. healthcare, of macroeconomic analysis, I reflected on that when they offered this as a framing for my presentation, and found myself a little daunted by the fact that we look at the healthcare landscape through the lenses that each of us has, and often we don't step back and think of it holistically. So that's the approach I'm going to take. What's going on around this industry that HIT professionals need to, at least in my view, comprehend and monitor, and if I'm successful, perhaps consider as future decisions are made. It's not an understatement to say we're in a state of flux in the U.S. healthcare system. And it's not just the result of the coronavirus. For some time, we've been looking at shifting of demand and the fact that the definition of health seems to be moving around almost daily. The recovery of these so-called non-essential procedures was moving along pretty well through October, but now we're expecting in some states some slowdown. At the same time, the public's trust in the system is high, but candidly slipping. They don't view the system as a system. We don't teach it in high school or even in college. So we deal with our view of a system anecdotally based on our own experiences, and our trust in that system is eroding as a result of affordability issues and a lack of transparency. The finances in the system are eroding, especially on the government-funded part of the industry. Federal funds are being stretched thinner, which means margins for the rest have to be derived from work done with private payers and others. You saw the RAND study that said the average commercial plan pays 326% of the Medicare rate in the average market. They looked at 348 markets. And then it seems that the tailwind is behind insurers and private equity and outsiders who seem to be taking advantage of all this disruption in the system. So that's kind of where we are. And the point I made here on the right is that you can't imagine that the post-COVID world in which we operate in the U.S. system will resemble the past. And I think it's not a stretch to say those that embrace that new will have a substantial advantage over those that are simply attempting to recover the old. I've said many times that it's not a health system. It's actually a collection of independent sectors that operate codependently, but they benefit from the fact that this ecosystem has grown at a substantially higher rate than our gross domestic product each year for more than 30 years, more than our annual inflation rate. It seems to create its own economy. And in fact, that's the case. Much of what we do in this industry is supply-driven demand, where the players in the system create something, mark it up, and pass it through. And in the end, someone pays for it, but for the same product, no one pays the same, and that information is kept secret. This ecosystem is obviously changing now. We've probably, in many sectors, like the hospital sector, seen a substantial amount of horizontal consolidation, especially in markets, that's reached a point of maybe saturation, at least through the lens of the FTC. But now vertical consolidation seems to be taking hold. There are more than 200 health systems that now operate insurance plans. Almost 40% of the doctors in the country now work as an employee of a health system. The largest employers of physicians in the country is Optum with more than 46,000, and that used to be United Health and Insure and so on. So this world, this ecosystem of sectors that operated independently is fast changing, and it's fast changing because of a combination of shifting demand. It's not necessary that the acute sector be the centerpiece of a system in the future, and the economics of the system that have for the past 15 years put a lot of pressure on organizations to take utilization out. So I look at the system, attempt to monitor what's going on in the system through 5 different zones of activity. And these zones really are operating on their own calendars. They are asynchronous. There's no connectivity directly across these sectors. The lag and lead indicators that each uses to monitor changes they make are not the same as the ones used in other sectors. And I want to unpack these through the lens of what does it mean in the HIT, through the lens of the HIT sector. That is an enabling part of the future state industry. So I'll start with clinical innovations because it's where the impetus for most of the changes in the U.S. health system originate. I'll tell you an irony. You see a list of these 2021 Cleveland Clinic innovations. The 2020 list was a completely different set of 10 innovations from the Cleveland Clinic, from the same sources. So that's how fast this is changing. And I think the dynamics that are important in HIT are to understand that the sources of this information are expanding well beyond our conventional sources of administrative data and clinical data, largely under the purview of health insurers, employers, Science, certainly with our investigational basic and applied research, doctors and hospitals. The world of health has discovered non-allopathic care. Social determinants in the parlance of the U.S. system are embedded parts of the health system in other developed systems of the world. Let me say that differently. The U.S. spends precious little in understanding and addressing social disparities or community-based environmental issues, food sourcing, housing, and so on. Other developed systems of the world spend 2.5 times what the U.S. system spends, and on an aggregate basis have outcomes comparable to ours at about 30% or lower cost. So how will HIT invest in identifying and structuring and facilitating the exchange of information from a widely expanding disparate set of sources so that we know what health is and can be, and how we appropriate our clinical investigation and the roles that our care teams play in its future? I don't think you can understate the importance of redefining health as a part of the imperative that HIT has inherited. Obviously, the first cousin to clinical innovation is technology. Technology in our industry has historically focused originally in cost reductions, administrative simplification, reducing paperwork, and so on. But in recent years has included clinical platforms that enable more precise diagnostics, more aggressive connectivity and care management. And what's clear in our industry is the ROI for those investments, especially in clinical information technologies, has not been as positive as should have been expected from those investments. When you're with organizations outside healthcare, the anomaly for us is that in most other industries, technology as a disruptor has reduced operating costs substantially. The same can't be said in healthcare. Whether that's because there's the pricing structure in technology is too high, or we are redundant in our use or changes of how we do our work, it's a fact. So the question that I have here is, to what extent will the future of HIT and the roles you play in your organizations require a much more strategic view of value creation? And if you happen to be in the clinical research world, it'll even get more spicy, because increasingly third parties are suggesting that the basic research that's done by NIH and others should be factored into the shareholder returns for the inventions of your work. And that will force HIT to be very discreet in its compilation of its data and in delineation of ownership rights and so on. So this gets to a really interesting future point for technology's use both in clinical innovation as well as administrative simplification. And I'd simply say we're not going to define value in the future the way we have in the past. The third zone I try to monitor is easily the most fun because we're in silly season in politics, as you know, and the current election cycle is bringing a spotlight to healthcare, A, as a result of the coronavirus, and B, as a result of the Affordable Care Act and its future. So let's just step back here for a minute and just see where HIT fits into this zone. Obviously, before the Affordable Care Act was passed, the monies that funded meaningful use were advanced in the Reconstruction Act of 2009, and it was viewed as a centerpiece of the Affordable Care Act that this would be an information-driven healthcare system. Title V of the Affordable Care Act says we have to create a whole new healthcare workforce that is data-driven and active users of technology. So embedded in the Affordable Care Act, embedded in current health policy, not blue nor red, is the notion that the industry has been asleep at the switch on capturing data and moving information from place to place and eliminating redundancy through the use of technology. With that said, technology has not delivered the value from the policy world's vantage point that it should. It has much ahead of it that'll make that even more complicated. The issues of data ownership and control will be fought in courts for the next several years. They're also a basis for efforts to delay executive orders or other guidance. And in tandem, there will be this intense focus on the role that technology plays in either contradicting or misdirecting or misleading decisions that are made based on the structure of data, the algorithms and underlying logic that support it. This gets to the secret sauce on which many of the suppliers in HIT base their valuations, base their business strategies. So does the future in the policy arena encourage more open sourcing? And does the policy of the future force a rethinking of HIT as more a public utility rather than as a competitive advantage? And that's something that I think government, policy, and politics is going to weigh in on. And a lot of that could be shaped by the results in 5 days. I'll just say the election is a change election. So turnout will be at an all-time high. And the numbers of voters who today say they are undecided is at an all-time low. So it's a highly divisive political climate, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. The fourth zone that requires our attention is the capital market. I follow this closely for a couple of reasons. Obviously, healthcare is labor intense, it's capital intense, and it's highly regulated. You need capital to stay in the game, to stay abreast of a standard of care that's acceptable and evidence-based, and so on. But really, a lot of things have changed in the way we source capital in the healthcare system. The government, through its appropriations at a federal, state, and local level, funds about half of the funds that are flowing into the system. And the private sector funds the other half but disproportionately. Uh, Public health, which has been the centerpiece of the coronavirus attention, is largely funded through state and local governments and has largely served underserved populations. So there's a demographic focus of most of those investments. Private equity, which has about $1.6 trillion invested in the industry, which has had the wind at its back now for the past 3 years and has a huge opportunity ahead, has an opportunity because traditional government-funded capital and employer-funded payments have shrunk. So you'd see these issues over here, more vertical consolidation, a monetary policy by the Fed that says we're going to make capital, at least in the near term. What Jay Powell has said is we want to keep the market flush. We don't want to have front page stories about major industries shutting down. So monetary policy appears to be safe for the investment of private capital. It's the reason of what people describe as the K recovery. Wall Street is recovering well. The net worth of the households in the top half of the population are at all-time highs, fully recovered from February. But the bottom line of the K, the bar going 45 degrees southeast, has seen a decline, a dramatic decline, which is really the politic of the recovery and relief funds. So here's the point. Capital is necessary to fund HIT. Organizations that have access to capital are the purchasers of HIT, and organizations that don't struggle to stay afloat, stay abreast. So will public policy or will private capital be the source of capital in the future of the healthcare system? Is healthcare technology better rationed if it's appropriated, if the capital for HIT is more appropriated through the public channels versus private equity, and so on? And HIT will be caught in the middle of those discussions. Not least is this consumer zone. Here's the key point. Healthcare is a B2B industry. Consumers are not major purchasers of healthcare. They influence decisions, and certainly in many of the alternative payment programs, like the accountable care organizations, their experiences, the quote patient experience, is a factor in rewarding bonuses. But this industry still operates with a view that consumers are incapable of playing an appropriate direct role in their care, and they require help. And some would say their dependence on the system is necessary, and others would challenge that, saying it's a fundamental flaw. What we know right now is that consumers believe technologies that help them make decisions at the point of care at a teachable moment are incredibly useful and believable and affordable. What is difficult for most consumers is sorting through the array of options they have and all of the vaporware that may be underneath all of those tools and technologies and gadgets that they can buy. So that's the conundrum we're in around HIT targeted to the consumer. Nonetheless, the B2C part of this industry will continue to grow, and it will extend beyond diagnostics and therapeutics to a wide range of health and well-being services. And primary care particularly will be the epicenter for those activities, where primary care will transition from MDs and DOs that see 30 visits a day to a hub of mental and physical health activities and services, prophylactic dentistry and ophthalmic care, pharmacy services, nutrition, counseling, and more. That will be the front door that ushers in technology-enabled self-care, which in my judgment is the future of how we refer to consumerism in healthcare. So healthcare is pretty complicated, and we've got a lot of burning platforms in front of us. You see on this list on the left some that seem to pop out more prominently than others. Campaign 2020, for instance, I'm paying close attention to the Senate races. 12 of the 23 Republican incumbents is in a toss-up race. One of the 12 Democratic incumbents faces a stiff challenge. So there's a possibility the Senate could flip. There's a possibility this is a blue wave election or not. You never know until you know. It was 36 days after the election when we knew the result of Bush v. Gore. So I suspect we're not going to know the result of campaign 2020 until a couple of weeks or later. Now, that's difficult because the engine of government and the engines of healthcare are moving forward. And we may not know for sure what the policy shift will be if it's Biden versus Trump. And we may not know at a state level. We have 11 governors' races, for instance, that are up for grabs. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and each one of these is complicated in and of itself. But I really want to spend the last couple minutes here on the list on the right and just call out a couple of these. From my view, we have to look at the potential of economic recovery and the deficit as a tipping point. How this industry addresses its role as part of economic recovery. We are the largest employer of any industry in our economy, 17 plus million people. But isn't it ironic that almost 900,000 of our own people cannot afford care in the system in which they work? We have a system whose economics are a bit upside down. Healthcare does well when the rest of the economy is doing well, and healthcare does well when the rest of the economy is hurting. Now, not every sector does well, but some do more than others. What's been notable in the coronavirus has been the windfall it's brought to many of the insurance companies. And as a result of relief funds and others, many of the larger healthcare systems are doing very well, but many aren't. So I think the question of economic recovery looms large as it relates to the deployment of capital and changes in operating procedures deploying HIT appropriately. And then I'll go to one other that is kind of, for me, a big question. How will a system of our type in a marketplace of 325 million that is as divided as it is, navigate through this looming question of what kind of system of the future do we really want? It's interesting that the majority of people are not happy with the system, but they also fear a government solution to that problem. So that makes it pretty difficult to imagine what this future will look like. I just know for sure that HIT is going to be in the middle of it. It'll be pulled into it because the response to each of these issues depends on data and sharing of data and process improvements that depend on technology. So I hope this is a framework that we can use for some discussions, and I certainly look forward to the questions and comments that you have.